Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Psychedelics Today, and this is an episode of Psychedelics Weekly. Your host, Kyle Buller here, and also joined by David Drapkin. David, how's it going? I don't think we've really been on a podcast in a long time together, so this should be fun.
Yeah, I'm delighted to be here. I don't care what we talk about. I just love chatting with you, Kyle. So great to see you, mate. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing good. Finally back in Jersey for maybe a few more weeks, and then, I don't know, we'll see what happens. I mentioned in one of the last episodes, I've been traveling a lot, so that's why I haven't been on the podcast as much. It's finding I'm not traveling with a lot of my gear, so sometimes hard to always record.
Yeah, you've been all over the place. So, yeah, you've been to, what are some countries and states of America you've been in the last few months?
Well, yeah, I just got back from Colorado. I was there for about 3 weeks. I was able to hang out with Joe, and then we finished up our last Vital retreat in Colorado. Just been traveling a lot for either conferences and then our Vital retreats. And so we just wrapped up the last retreat of the year. Again, we had 2 in Colorado. We had 1 in the Netherlands, 2 in Jamaica, 1 in Costa Rica. And then, we were I spent the month pretty much down in Jamaica, then flew right to Miami for Psychedelic, which Joe and I chatted about in the last episode. And so it's been fun. Been on the road all year. It's cool. I've been enjoying it.
I guess my update is just being home working on my laptop. That's where I've been. So, I wanted to tell people, and I've been taking most of the role of interviewing new Vital applicants for this next year's course. And I've probably met now about 150 students from around the world, and I love who's applying. I love the energy of the applicants, and it's really interesting to see who's being drawn to what we're offering here. And interestingly, unexpectedly, there's about maybe a dozen people from Utah that have personal experiences of being in the Mormon religion and leaving it and having sexual trauma, religious trauma, and wanting to take Vital as part of their own journey and as a journey to help other folks in their community. And we've also had around 10 students applying that are veterans as well, so even more than last time, and more students applying that are themselves addiction specialists in recovery themselves. So it's just fascinating to see. It's almost like this is a research study, just seeing who's applying and how they want to apply the Vital into their community, into their professional life. So I'm inspired by our students. Love them.
Yeah, I love the diversity, and we've been hearing that from some students, just around the diversity of people that are part of the program and just the different perspectives and different roles people are doing. So if you're interested in Vital, if you're new to this is our 12-month training program, really focused on psychedelic harm reduction, integration, and kind of ethical practices. And this will be kicking off on April 17th. Monday, we'll kick off with an introduction call, and then classes start on Tuesday, the 18th. And there will be a 2-hour webinar on Tuesdays, and then you break off into your study groups. So some smaller little pods, so you can do some deeper dives, processing around the material, some exercises, and then again, we've been chatting about the retreats, so there's also a retreat component part of Vital. So we would love to have you if you're interested in applying. Our application date ends on March 19th. So you can learn more at vitalpsychedelictraining.com. And then we also have one of our Vital students actually presenting on March 13th. It's called A Somatic Perspective on Sex and Psychedelics, focusing on consent and repressed sexual trauma memories. So it's going to be really, really fascinating. So definitely check that out, psychedelicstoday.com/events. I think that's it for announcements. So again, if you're interested in Vital, we are taking applications until March 19th, and we'll be closing that off, and you can apply at vitalpsychedelictraining.com. So David, let's jump in. What's been going on this week in psychedelics? I'm guessing it's kind of spanned out through the past few weeks, but the first set of news, this was published on February 28th, and a new species of magic mushrooms named after legendary mycologist Paul Stamets was just discovered. So I'll read a little bit. This is actually from fungi.org, or ffungi.org. So a new species named Psilocybe Stametsi was discovered in a cloud forest in Ecuador and has been collected twice, once in 2011 by Dr. Bryn Dentinger of University of Utah and a colleague, then again in 2020, Juliana Furchi of the Fungi Foundation. Sorry if I butchered your name there. Together with friends, including Robert McFarlane and musician Cosmo Sheldrake. The mushroom was founded in Los Cedros Biological Reserve, which is an area protected under the Rights of Nature articles in the Ecuadorian Constitution. So, yeah, it's pretty cool to have Paul Stamets have a mushroom named after him.
Yeah, I loved how you pronounced it as well, Carl. I was reading it, and in my English accent, I'd say Psilocyb Stametsi. How did you pronounce it?
Stametsi, but I might be pronouncing it.
No, I love yours. Yours was much better than mine. Yeah, it sounds like it's this old Latin mushroom, but it's lovely that it's being named after Paul Stamets. You know, he's been working with mushrooms for 40 years. He's, you know, probably the most famous, mushroom expert in the world, especially after fantastic fungi. So it's really cool that someone has named this after him. And I think a separate piece that we also saw around Paul Stamets was Graham Peshenik mentioned it on his Twitter account. The Stamets stack is finally patented. So I think it's taken a few years. So yeah, there's a way that Paul's been working on building out his microdosing mushroom range and getting a patent over that. And I think he's raised $60 million to his company Mycomedica for really scaling this out. So personally speaking, It sounds like he's just having the most incredible time ever to have a mushroom named after him and to get this IP and to have done the big raise. So all that hard work for so many years is really, he's awesome. And he's going to be at Breaking Convention, Carl, in Exeter University in England. It is April 20th to 22nd. So yeah, they just announced Paul Stamets will be there. We're going to be there. Johanna, maybe some other folks in our team at Breaking Convention. So I'm a big fan of his. I've watched the film a few times. Fantastic Fungi. My parents have watched it. It's just a really good starting place, I think, isn't it?
It's definitely a good starting place, and I think I've watched it, I don't even know, like 7 times. I don't think I ever really got bored of it. Just the cinematography and just the shots that they captured, just so visually beautiful. And the story, too, and I appreciated that they didn't just solely focus on psychedelics. They had a good mix of medicinal mushrooms, the psychedelic mushrooms, and just how, mushrooms communicate to each other and play a really vital role in the ecosystem, especially forests, like transferring information and nutrients to different trees and plants. So it's a really great documentary. I think it's up on Netflix, so if anybody hasn't checked it out, I believe that's where it's streaming. And
there was one quote I wanted to throw in here that apparently Paul Stamets has said and believes that mushrooms, I guess psychedelic and otherwise, that mushrooms have higher potential positivity for the human race than when we discovered penicillin. That what we are potentially on the brink of right now is, as we're doing loads more research into mushrooms, more people are asking questions, using them, different regimens, it could have as if not greater impact on humankind than the discovery of penicillin, which is we learn about at school. That's going to save millions of lives. So, and that we only know so far 10% of all fungal species on Earth have been identified, and we already have huge hopes around those 10%. So what on earth does it mean that we don't even know what the other 90% of fungal species are and what they could potentially do, or what we could learn from them or use them for? So it's just amazing, isn't it? These little things, what they can do for us.
Yeah, and I think I actually learned this maybe through Vital. One of the presenters was talking about how they did find some sort of fungus that actually produces a natural form of ketamine, right? We always think of ketamine as a kind of synthetic substance that was really kind of derived from PCP, and then actually finding it in nature, which I think is pretty cool.
Yeah, I might have heard that. Was that to do with yeast production? Was that something else?
I forget who was presenting on it, but I remember kind of doing some research on it, and there is an article about it. And I forget if it's a ketamine-like molecule or if it's actually ketamine. So yeah, fascinating. Mushrooms are cool little creatures.
Yeah. So that's what stood out to me. Anything else for you on that one, Carl?
No, I think that's about it. Yeah, just cool that Paul Stamets has a mushroom named after him. Actually, in this, I'm guessing this is just fantasticfungi.org, fffungi.org. Dr. Andrew Weil actually has a mushroom named after him too, which I find pretty interesting. I guess in 1996, he had a mushroom named after him. And for those that don't know who Dr. Andrew Weil is, a pretty prominent leader in the field of natural medicine.
I'm just thinking.
On the podcast before.
Yeah, slight tangent, Carl. Have the Shulgins had any molecules named after them?
I don't think so.
They found so many and created so many. I don't know. They had very technical names for them, but I don't think they personally put their names on them.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Yeah, something to aim for, folks. Try and get a psychedelic compound molecule named after you. That's one for the kids.
Some people might find that a little controversial, but I don't know. It's also kind of cool.
Yeah, it definitely opens up a bit of can of worms. Like, can we own these things in IP and all of that stuff? And who do they really belong to?
Yeah, the whole IP and patenting thing is it's interesting, right? A lot of complexity there and a lot of different opinions where, some trademarks can be really important to kind of protect your work and what you're doing. So I guess it really kind of comes down to the intention on why somebody is doing that. Yeah,
and there's a difference between, for me, speaking personally, around Paul Stamets having a patent on something he's devoted his life to, and say another company that's more like, VC backed biotech style, and they're doing it from as newcomers just to extract profit. So it's a different feel, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. All right, should we switch gears and head on over to this other article? This article was published, I guess it's in Science Direct. I don't know if it was published anywhere else here. The prevalence and associations of challenging, difficult, and distressing experiences using classic psychedelics. So authors here, Otto Simonson, Peter Hendricks, Richard Chambers, Walter Osika, sorry again if I butcher that, and Simon Goldberg. Really fascinating to finally get some data around challenging and distressing, difficult experiences. I don't know if there has been a report on that yet, and so this is a self-study. So it's a survey study. And they had about 613 respondents to a questionnaire who reported lifetime classic psychedelic use. The respondents marked as psychedelic users. They were asked to complete a number of items related to challenging, difficult, and distressing experiences, and they used the 26 item the challenging psychedelic or the challenging experience questionnaire, which respondents rated to the extent of which they experienced any listed phenomenon such as isolation, loneliness. There's questions: I had profound experience of my own death, I experienced a decreased sense of sanity, and etc. And it sounds like the results, around 59.1%, have never had a challenging, difficult, or distressing experience. I find that pretty interesting. So that's over like half that didn't have a distressing experience. I feel like that's pretty good.
Yeah, I wanted to really explore that with you, Carl. What does that mean? Not perhaps literally, but how are we defining a challenging experience? And we've got that questionnaire that can answer that one. But also, to what extent do we want a challenging experience, or can a challenging experience be good for us? And what are some of the different ways that when we use psychedelics, we are more likely to have a challenging experience? And for some of that, it goes into the 5 most commonly reported variables that can lead to a challenging experience. It's saying no preparation, negative mindset, no psychological support, disagreeable social environment, and disagreeable physical environment. So no real surprises there. It doesn't go into as much detail. I'm interested from a kind of psychotherapeutic, almost an archetypal level. A challenging experience has a lot of shadow in it, potentially. and that can have, some real threads of benefit to us through experiencing that challenge of meeting our shadow. But how much? How soon? Are we ready for it? Did we expect it? Did we prepare for it? And it might be that if we're not doing all that preparation and intention, and if it's more recreational use and kind of just personal growth, and then maybe we won't have a challenging experience because that's not what we're going in for. We're just going to have fun. But it also could mean because we prepare less, we could have more of a challenging experience because we were not expecting that. So I'd say both could be true. What are some of your thoughts?
I was actually just chatting with somebody last night about this, just around like sensitivity, and somebody that may consider themselves as a highly sensitive person or just very sensitive to energies. And we were talking about like the difference of people that are very kind of like energetically sensitive to their environment, to emotions, to anything around them, and how they could really take on a lot of different energy, and how that could maybe create a challenging experience versus, there's some people that can just take psychedelics in all sorts of different environments and seem to just have fun. So I also wonder about kind of like the psychological makeup of people. When I was younger, I tried to have fun with them in different kind of like recreational settings, at a concert or with like a small group of friends with like music. And, I was always the type of person that would go inside, and I couldn't just always like have fun. So like I would always report like, I probably had tons of difficult, challenging, distressing experiences, but maybe that's just also my psychological makeup, right? Like I'm just very kind of introverted at times, always thinking a lot, always trying to figure out like what's going on internally. And obviously that stuff's going to get amplified more. So, it makes me wonder about a person's background too, and how that may influence the experiences. Plus, set and setting, I think that's going to be really important. If you do have like a negative thought or a re-experience of something while you're at, say, a concert, or you're with a bunch of people that you don't feel supported with, it's probably going to make it a little bit more challenging.
So much of this does come down to the basics around set and setting, the preparation and the intention setting. And something I've been doing recently is, definitely the last few years, is having an intention set beforehand, like around amounts of being taken, like who am I with, how much, where, what's my contingency plan, and also around, say, just using cannabis, and that's mentioned in this report. So not mixing just cannabis and alcohol. That used to be an old trick of mine when I was a college student. That would, oh my God, call it whiteouts in England. Like you just turn kind of green and white, and oh my gosh. So just not mixing stuff. But there was also an important piece here. It's saying the 5 most commonly reported helpful interventions during a challenging experience could be smoking cannabis. So some of the other things were kind of mindfulness, trying to calm the mind, changing the location, changing the social environment, and asking a friend for help. So I think all 4 of those definitely, have an impact on just getting safer, grounding oneself. But with the cannabis piece, some people do use cannabis to help with the come down, to kind of help with grounding. And other times it can do the opposite. It can just add on that aspect of kind of just flipping out. And I've had experiences before, with psilocybin and cannabis, that it was unexpectedly just too much, even with very small amounts, and it kind of came down to set and setting, and it's hard to combine. I know there's some people have all these candy flipping lemonade things, and I don't know what they all are, and you change around the combinations, but yeah, I'm quite I think a purist. I'm like, okay, this one's good for now, let's just really go deep into this experience. But yeah, what's your sense around cannabis in particular? Because they did say here it was in the top 5 of things to help with just grounding themselves. That was the thing that kind of caught me by surprise too, of the top 5. I know for a lot of people it is really helpful. And again, I think it may depend on kind of like your psychological makeup, your kind of physiological makeup as well. Like I've never had great experiences with combining psilocybin and cannabis in my younger years, because it kind of put me over the edge. And I remember this one particular time, I was visiting
visiting some friends at college, and we ended up using some cannabis during the experience, and it just completely put me over the edge. And that was like, never again. Like, I'm never going to do that. But, there are some people that it like chills them out. And for me, cannabis is another amplifier. And so, I always kind of appreciate like Daniel's McQueen work around psychedelic or cannabis as a psychedelic, because that's always kind of been my, I guess, relationship with it. It's always been like a pretty intense amplifier at times. And so, yeah, I don't know. I find that to be interesting. And, I think, if you're reading this report, I think it's also just really important to figure out like your relationship to cannabis and how you use it and how it affects you. And again, sometimes people can really tolerate it. Other times it might just kind of spin people out more in kind of like a paranoid kind of thought process. A lot of anxiety tied to that. So yeah, just kind of listen to your body and figure that out.
I think that's where the mindfulness-based piece comes into it, and it's mentioned in the article as almost like a global skill to have this ability to practice mindfulness, not just when we're sitting in meditation posture, but when we are actually having a difficult, challenging psychedelic experience. Can we pull out of our toolbox mindfulness practices there, to really tune into our body, our awareness, our senses, any kind of affirmations, validations, how to use that in those moments, because it's really hard to do it there, and it's great to have someone else that we've kind of practiced that with, and just to have mindfulness more broadly integrated into our lives so that we're familiar with it. And I think just as a training perspective, Carl, that's what we've been trying to do with Vital, is really giving students an ability to explore their own inner cartography and to find what works for them around grounding, around their ability to hold space for others, and to have their own experiences with non-ordinary states through multiple means, so they're able to then just be present for others and help them get through that. It's not theoretical, it's not scientific so much, it's experiential and it's internal, and it does bring us into contact with, that shadow kind of inner work aspect, which I think we have to have if we want to hold space for other people.
Totally. I found this to be pretty interesting in the results here. 57.1 reported at least one enduring symptom. So feeling anxious being most common. So having that last like a day or so afterwards. But then also the most agreed was with a gratitude statement saying, I'm glad I've used a classic psychedelic. So, I think going back on some of your questions around, the bad trip, right? I think it was, it might have been a paper by Dr. Robin Carhart-Harris and team looking at some of those challenging experiences, sometimes having the most therapeutic effect. And I find that to be, pretty interesting, of like going through some of that shadow material or really challenging experiences, facing some of that stuff, and kind of having some resolution. I also found this one to be interesting. 11.3% reported co-use of at least one type of medication at the time of their most challenging experience. So yeah, also makes me wonder around medication contraindications there. And then LSD was most commonly associated with challenging, difficult, and distressing psychedelics, which, that's pretty interesting too. And I wonder about just the set and setting most people take LSD in. And I think there's a lot of different factors. LSD seems to be much more of a celebratory, recreational use, either at festivals or music, or with like a group of friends. And maybe not so ceremonial, say as with like ayahuasca, or how, people are developing more ceremonial use with psilocybin. And then I also wonder, are people getting pure LSD, right? Is there LSD that's not LSD? They're getting something completely different. And is that playing an effect on their challenging experience?
Yeah, thanks, Kyle. And one final thought from me is, challenging experiences having an aspect of ontological shift, rupture, and a rupturing of reality, personal reality, the meaning of life, the sense of self, and how to pull it all together again. And yeah, do we want that? Do we welcome that? Is that why we're using psychedelics, or are we just here to, just chill out and have some fun and be with friends? It really depends, but there is that potential for the ontological rupturing, and so being prepared that could happen even if it's not the intention. You can't say it's not ever going to happen.
Right. You never know. That's why I always come back to, some of Stan's stuff of this non-specific amplifier. Sometimes we don't know what's actually going on in the unconscious within psyche. And, it just maybe takes that one time for that to really kind of bubble up to the surface. But yeah, I think it's just important to think about that preparation as well, right? So like if we know this is, almost half the people that reported this had challenging experiences. How do we really focus on some of the preparation? And I think really focusing on that toolkit for folks, right? Whether that's through mindfulness, through breath work, different breathing practices, etc., to really help you navigate that experience when difficulty comes up. I'm always coming back to breath work, right? It's like, when something challenging comes up, it's like really just root in the body, somatically process it and breathe through it. And this too shall pass.
And I'm also just sorry to continue, but we had that class a couple of weeks ago around spiritual emergence in our Vital course. And that was really, really powerful, just talking about, in a sense, how to prepare for it, having contingency plans available, and really just thinking it through, like who is my support? What is it that could trigger me? What is it that I will do if I am triggered? What's like my amber light plan of attack if I am going through a challenging experience, and then what is my red light if I'm really I'm about to do something that's potentially really unsafe, or really acting out because I just can't kind of stand this feeling anymore. So that was really powerful to understand a spiritual emergence process. We're trying to utilize that as potentially beneficial, or just navigating it with kindness and intention, but trying to avoid it kind of moving into that spiritual emergency process. I think a lot of students really appreciated kind of understanding that spectrum of spiritual emergence that gets to that kind of red light stage.
Yeah, and what you're hinting to as well is my good friend and colleague Michelle Hobart was the one that presented during that, and she shared this spiritual emergency RAP plan. And that RAP plan is really about identifying your triggers, identifying when things are going to get worse, and then really identifying your network, your coping skills, your toolbox. So when things are getting bad, how do you notice that and try to get ahead of it? And then also thinking, who's that one person that you can really reach out to and rely on, that they're not going to pathologize your experience. They're going to really understand it and support it. And so, that also really comes into the preparation phase. It's if you do have a challenging experience, who can you reach out to afterwards, and really think about, this one person is not going to say I'm crazy, or they're going to pathologize it, or, shame me that I, took a substance and I was trying to work on myself and I had this experience. So coming up with a plan, even though you may not always think that that's something difficult's going to arise, it is always good to be prepared and think about those things that you can do before going into these experiences, because they do happen, right? And I think we'll probably see a little bit more of that as the mainstreaming of psychedelics happens and more people are doing this. So yeah, I'm always thinking about safety nets here, and what is our kind of cultural safety net for, those really challenging, difficult experiences that people are having. And, I also wonder too, how, even though, this is a self-study, self-reported, how many people that had challenging experiences actually took it, right? So there's always this bias of who's actually taking these surveys and who's showing up to fill it out. Because I think also too, sometimes people have a really hard time admitting that they had a challenging experience. And I noticed that too when I was doing a lot more kind of integration coaching and therapy, of people starting off saying I don't want to sound crazy, but ... Even though, they might know my background and, they're reaching out to me because I have that kind of spiritual emergence, psychedelic integration background, but just even the shame, or like fear that, can I actually disclose this? Right. So I always think about that too. Sometimes it's really challenging to talk about these challenging experiences, because, it's still the taboo, a little bit that we're battling up against.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning that. That's really key. The challenging experiences are challenging to talk about. Yeah, but it's really important that we can. Awesome. Shall we move on to another article that we've got here?
Let's do it.
So, as you may know, this is a kind of a ongoing story that is kind of unfolding as we speak. It's around Synthesis. So that is the company that originated in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam in 2018, and offering retreats and training, and that also has developed, an Oregon retreat center and training course there. So there was a really good article written by Josh Hardman at Psychedelics Alpha. So definitely go check that out. It's being added to kind of day by day because this is a breaking news story. But in the opening paragraph, Josh writes, "The Synthesis Institute has imploded, with Bankruptcy leaving over 200 current students in limbo. The organisation, which includes its Dutch retreat business and psychedelic facilitated training programs, had planned to develop a 124-acre property in Oregon, but before its lofty Oregon plant had taken off, the company quietly reached the end of its runway." And there's a lot in the article, so go check it out for all the in-depth information. But it seems like it's in flux right now. So there's an organisation called Retreat Guru that is in negotiations with the Synthesis team around continuing the program and taking on that kind of financial responsibility around working with the students in their program. And it's interesting, today I was just chatting with an actual Synthesis student that applied to take our Vital course, and he's saying, I'm give him a couple of weeks to see how things pan out here. But yeah, there's a lot of students there who don't really know, are they going to be able to continue in their training that they started in November? What's going to happen? So I really hope for them that there's some clarity here, and if they pay their tuition, that they can find a way to get that back to them. And I personally have met a few of the team from Synthesis, and seemed like really good people, in this for the right reasons, and they actually changed their business model from being for profit to more like a stakeholder model, and Bennett Zellner was one of their advisors that helped them to do that. So they've really put a lot of effort into doing this in the right way. They had Ros Watts working with them as well in the early days.
Yeah, they had the team at Imperial help out with collecting some data to do research from their retreats. So yeah, they had a really, really solid team. It sounds like there was kind of a lot that kind of contributed to this, and I'm sure not everything is so public, but maybe the one thing that really kind of contributed was buying the retreat center in Buckhorn Springs. And that was around like $3.6 million. And then having challenges with that property. So I remember, before the county started voting, there was this fear that the county was going to vote against psilocybin retreat centers or service centers in that county. And it sounded like they ended up voting for it, but then it sounds like from this article at Psychedelic Alpha, they were zoned out. So where they were located, they didn't have proper zoning to actually operate a psilocybin service center there. And, that probably was a huge hit for them. And also sounds like there was some, drop in retreat sales in Q4. And so, that probably also contributed to some things as well. So, I think this is like kind of... I don't know, my phone was like blowing up with like different people reaching out, asking if I heard about this, or, people sending me, the links to these articles. And, it felt like it kind of came out of nowhere. And I think it has shaken up a lot of people that, a really kind of successful business like this, and, sometimes referred to as like some of the gold standards in psychedelic retreats, could come out and declare bankruptcy. And, we're kind of also seeing that in biotech too, right? A lot of biotech psychedelic companies are really struggling. Been hearing it's been really hard to get financing, a lot of cutbacks. And so it makes me wonder, like, how are people feeling about, like, the psychedelic industry, right? Some people are maybe a little nervous, is some of the hype, even though the hype is continuing to increase, is business also sustainable? And it comes back to accessibility, I think, right? A lot of these, therapies and retreats are also very expensive, it's interesting. It's an interesting time here in the psychedelic landscape.
Yeah, you're right that everyone's talking about this right now. That's why we're talking about it, because we want to be real here, and there's questions that I'm sure we'll find the answers to in the next week or two. But yeah, it's sad, man. I feel sad about this because I've met a few of the folks there. When I was first kind of getting into this space a few years ago, they were up there as probably the preeminent voice, one of them, alongside Psychedelics Today and other people, about this new era that we're kind of moving into, and this kind of integrative piece as well. It's not just purely science, and it's more like integrative experiences of helping people to be held in psychedelic space. So it really is sad, and I just hope that there's a positive way out of this for people, or maybe at the very least some lessons to be learned. And I can definitely appreciate how much of a risk it was for them to pay $3.6 million for this retreat center. It was a gamble, and it looks like it hasn't paid off, unfortunately. And we've been doing our retreats through Vital for our students, and we don't have a retreat center. There is no Vital retreat center anywhere. If we build one, we'll let you know, okay? But it's just such a huge amount of money, and then the ongoing costs, the upkeep of it, and you need to keep it full. We've got some good retreat partners around the world, and they partner with lots of good groups, good people. It's just hard to make it work that way. But and I also think we are such a young industry that it makes it really hard to try and get that first mover advantage, as Synthesis did. Miles Katz moved to Oregon, with his life and his partner to help to make it work. And it takes a lot to make it work. So we're not quite there as an industry yet. Waiting, I think, still for MAPS, MDMA for PTSD. Once that gets commercialized, I think it's a different era. That will be kind of version 2 of the psychedelic industry. Until then, we're kind of just scrapping away at the little bits, that fall off the table. Companies are laying off folks right now. They're narrowing their clinical trials. So you can see Compass Pathways has made their clinical trial process a bit more modest. Other companies have as well, including, Beckley Psytech. Cybin announced some layoffs and restructuring. So, just a lot of companies are closing clinics and just, I think, trying to get through the next 6 to 12 months until MDMA is commercialized, and then we're just pressing a whole new button there that changes everything.
Yeah, something I keep reminding folks is, like, it feels like we're, like, some people feel like it's still late in the game to get involved, right? Because there's been all this hype and all this explosion. But something I just keep reminding even our students, like, it feels like psychedelic therapy is here, but it's not. We're still in the beginning, right? Even though Oregon is legal right now, like, I don't actually know how many service centers may be available. I don't know if any are really open.
No,
and then you have the training practitioner bottleneck. And so, if we look at the laws, like, Oregon should be off to the races, but now you have all these kind of bottlenecks that are happening. So, it may feel like it's here, but it's also not here. And I think that is, like, part of the risk of trying to have that first mover advantage to get situated in an industry that we're still dealing with a lot of federally illegal substances, and that's just the reality of it. So even thinking about like banking, right? You're going to see the same thing with cannabis laws, where it's going to be really hard to bank, right? And I think that was it has been an issue with some folks trying to get service centers going in Oregon, where you can't deal with that, right? Like it's either you need to buy a piece of property outright, or maybe deal with a landlord that already has it paid off and they're open to it, but they're not dealing with a mortgage. And so there's a lot of complexities because of the drug war that we're still battling up against. And it might, hinder progress here and there. And again, kind of you saw it in early cannabis too, where people couldn't bank any of their money, right? And it's like, what do you do with that, right? It's really confusing. And I think Joe probably has a little bit more insight into that, because his partner actually was part of that in Colorado in those early years, and kind of knowing some of all those crazy hurdles that they had to go through. So yeah, this whole thing also kind of reminded me a little bit of around what happened with the school that I went to for my undergrad, Burlington College, where they had really good intentions and bought a piece of property that cost way too much. It was a small school. They were housed in this little location, bought this property. It was the last green space in Burlington on Lake Champlain. I think it was $10 million. No, $10,000 would have been super cheap. $10 million, and they just didn't have, say, the funds to keep paying for it, and they had to make they restructured a little bit and did all this stuff. It had nothing to do with I think the faculty, the education. It was really just a financial risk that they took on, and they thought we want to grow, right? We want to take that next step. And so it's also it's a good lesson in just like risk management and thinking about like what companies can take on. I just feel for all those folks at Synthesis, and it's very hard, especially like all the press around it and all the students that may have been kind of like locked out. And as much as like we've been a little delayed with our Oregon training program because of like the HEC application process and stuff like that. It's also a good example of, say, why an organization like the Higher Education Coordinating Commission exists, right? To really protect students in making sure, you have a proper business model, you have ways to deal with refunds, you have ways to really kind of help students pass, and just so organizations don't come up and fold on students last minute. And I think Synthesis, again, like some of the team there and the organization had good intentions and probably didn't want this to happen, right? But things happen, which is unfortunate. So yeah, just feeling for everybody part of that team, and I can't imagine what that's like being on the other side of that. It's probably so stressful and so upsetting. So
yeah, just sending out healing, positive vibes to everyone involved there. Yeah, and we'll keep you updated, folks, what happens next. So yeah. All right, so we got one more story. Let's squeeze it in, Carl. This is a fun one, so we'll end on a more fun kind of light note. This is an article that we read in the Los Angeles Times. The writer's called Adam Chorn, and the title of the article is A Drug-Free Digital Psychedelic Trip. And just to kind of intro it, Carl, it's talking about this reality center, it's called, in Santa Monica, that uses a proprietary combination of pulsing lights, sounds, and vibrations. So you lie in one of these kind of haptic feedback beds. It sounds like it's like a water bed. You have a light show on happening, and then you have this music playing, and it's really a curated experience of accessing a psychedelic state. It looks like they've got a 60-minute session and other sessions, and they have large rooms for group sessions and then smaller rooms for smaller, more intimate experiences and integration. And yeah, there are no psychedelics here, folks. It's using other kind of tech digital means. So interesting, Carl?
Super fascinating. I love this quote by this article by one of the founders here, and they're saying what we're doing is sort of like neuroscience DJing.
Yeah.
It's just like an interesting way to kind of think about it. But after reading this and kind of looking it over, it really reminds me about the Lucia Light, which is something similar. They use audio, like headphones, and then they use kind of like a lamp with a bunch of LED lights, and it does a bunch of, I think it just like kind of flickers on and off and does a bunch of stuff. But this sounds a little bit more robust, where there's like, video screens with kind of different psychedelic images around. You even just kind of mentioning the hydro bed or water bed that's giving you, these kind of vibrational experiences, and all being synced up. So it sounds really interesting. And I'll just chat about my own experience with when I did the Lucia Light a number of years ago. And I actually did a podcast right after. I did this in Vermont with a facilitator, and, some of the most beautiful colors I've ever seen, like some of the most bluest blues, greenest greens, and the visual aspect was just really fascinating. So I could imagine it could be something a little bit similar, but it's really cool to find different technologies that like alter consciousness that aren't always oriented towards ingesting substances. And what are some of the benefits of that, right? It's legal. Maybe it's it's a nice kind of entry point into the psychedelic space. So kind of like dipping your toes in, learning how to work with your nervous system before taking like a deep dive, right? It's like, instead of just jumping in the deep end, can you kind of dip your toes in and learn how to swim a little bit more before kind of going there. And it sounds like, this was, there's been some pretty intense experiences. I'll read a little bit here by somebody, that the author that went through this said, "With my eyes firmly closed, I could full on, quote, see the pulsing light positions just inches from my face, most cascading, melting, and swirling whirls of color. Chanting, tinkling bells, and crashing waves swelled in my headphones at the same time as rumbling and vibrating increased on all sides of me. From time to time, I could hear calm spoken word snippets. Quote, we find one ember, and very gently we fan that ember, blow on it, and it gets brighter. And from that ember, we rebuild the fire." And he says, I was one of the swirling fractal rainbow aura at the center of the universe, and for a brief moment, it felt like I was staring backwards through time to observe my own swirling double helix strand of DNA taking shape out of the cosmic soup of nothingness. That sounds pretty psychedelic if I ever heard it.
I'm going to do an American accent here. Apologies. Dude, that's totally awesome, man. Like, reading that little bit from Adam, that's the writer of the article. That was Adam's experience. It just sounds like he is Hunter S. Thompson in Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. It's just taken shitloads of mescaline. It's very deep, it sounds like, from that experience. And to some extent, it's not surprising, because we know the power of light, and of, in a sense, a more hypnagogic state, and music in particular. So, other folks are using VR. Music is incredibly powerful for inculcating those kinds of states of consciousness. So fascinating to see that this is popping up, like just literally in a high street near you. Probably eventually there's going to be a psychedelic clinic, a ketamine clinic. There's going to be integration harm reduction centers, and there's going to be these digital reality centers, where you want to go and play a bit of VR golf or soccer, but you can also, do some of this stuff. And there should be some kind of screening process, I think, around who is doing this. So I don't know too much about that piece, but there was one bit in the article that I just wanted to tell folks. It's nice that they, because they're really doing a proof of concept here about this reality center. They actually gave free treatments to 250 veterans and their family members, and discounted sliding scale to another 50 people to access these. So, could this be a more affordable alternative, or dipping your toe into the water for folks that want to use psychedelics, or maybe they're on the wait list because there's just not enough service centers or trained clinicians? So while you're waiting, perhaps you can do this service, last 60 minutes. So it could really help to improve accessibility and prepare people for their kind of heroic doses.
Yeah. And also something that's coming up for me and just emphasizing that psychedelics are just one tool. If we look at a lot of different types of rites of passages, as Stan likes to call these technologies of the sacred, right? So there's so many different ways of entering into these holotropic states, these non-ordinary states of consciousness. And, psychedelics is just one. Breath work, before they had sensory isolation, maybe going into a cave, going on a vision quest, so just maybe writing it off, being like, oh, that's just light, or, oh, that's not a psychedelic. Like for, millennia, humans have been working in these states by so many different ways. Meditation, right? Like yoga, and the types of experiences humans have written about these experiences are very transformative, right? I mean, it's not always needing to necessarily focus on psychedelics or plant medicines. There's lots of different ways to access these states. So yeah, it's cool. Like, I don't know, I've played around a little bit with VR, and it's pretty wild too. I know this isn't VR, but just thinking about the technology that's coming on.
Kyle, I love that you just brought that up about technology of the sacred, and I'm thinking there is definitely so many different techniques and tools that we can use to access that. But fundamentally, I feel like, what is the technology of the sacred? And I think that's us. We are. And we have many ways of getting inside and exploring and expressing, revealing and healing. We are the technology of the sacred. And, I just did an Instagram Live and podcast with Victor Cabral, and he's making this film documentary, We Are the Medicine. And obviously that's a quite renowned quote from Maria Sabina. Yeah. But we are sacred technology, the human being and the essence of our soul and true nature that psychedelics enable us to become more familiar with. So I love that you dropped that in there just at the end. Thanks, mate.
Yeah, something that's coming up for me is something that our breathwork teacher Lenny mentioned, and I forget what philosopher this comes from. And this philosopher was talking to another person and saying, can we have a relationship with the universe just like me and you have a relationship? And how do we develop that relationship, right? And I think it is through these different technologies that we do, right? We start to deepen our connection with, that within us, and that's with external of us as well. And how do we have those relationships? And so I think about that pretty often, like, how do we develop a relationship with the universe? And however you want to define that, I know that gets a little bit more into like spiritual and religious thought, but there's lots of different ways people develop relationships with the universe, again, with all these different types of techniques. And it seems like it is just, rooted in our DNA to, access these states of consciousness and be able to explore our inner and outer realities.
Yeah, and I like just going back to the earlier article, we're talking about ontological rupturing, our relationship with the universe. So yeah, it's good to have people that can help us to navigate that and to keep us safe and to keep ourselves safe with preparation. 100%. Yeah. All right, man.
Well, David, this has been fun. Anything that you want to close with for today?
Oh, thank you. This was great. Love chatting with you, Carl. There's so much happening in a week. Like, we literally had another 5 articles, news stories that we wanted to talk about. So there'll be plenty more next week. But thanks a lot, Carl.
Yes. And thank you, everybody, for listening. And we'll catch you on the next episode of Psychedelics Today and Psychedelics Weekly. So have a beautiful day whenever you're listening to this, everybody, and take care.
Thanks, folks. Bye, everyone.